you being the guy that's causing us problems, maybe you should do some research. Did that just happen one day for you?
Imagine what happens if people can't go to Facebook for 72, 96 hours. Good grief alive.
Hacker discussion today, but that's as good as advice as any. It's a great snippet. Welcome, everybody. This is Tuesday Morning Grind, episode number 54. Today we have Chris Roberts with us. Chris is a security advisor, hacker, and security researcher. Chris, thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Much appreciated.
Chris, I know you from seeing your talks on YouTube, seeing you on other podcasts, some social media stuff. But for those who don't know you, how did you get into security? What do you do? Give us the background.
Oh, gosh. It goes back way more years. This is normally gray when it's not colored, let's face it. So we're going back. I mean, I was 10, 11 years old. I started messing around at the time. It was, I spent almost a year at boarding school. I didn't last a full year at boarding school. And one of the other kids had a Sinclair ZX8081. And so that was the first foray into these things. Because, I mean, up until that point, it was like the typewriter and the little key and you press go and it goes and off you go. And this ZX81 was like, holy shit, 4K in memory. Like a whole 4K, that was it. Operating system, command line, and off you go. So that for a while. Then boarding school, I didn't agree, so I lost my ability to get to that stuff. And then really it was at school, and I came back to the UK and went to school there, and started into the gaming scene, like just early like PC games and the Atari games, and I didn't like losing at them. And so I started figuring out basically what the hell makes a thing run. And it was taking that mentality of, years beforehand, my poor mother comes home and finds me with like fucking toaster and vacuum cleaner and pieces like screwdrivers and shit in my hand going, hey, I figured out what made it work. And it's that same mentality taking the computer systems to pieces. And that's what made them run. And then that got into like CDC, that got into the BBS boards and everything else. And, off it went from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So at a certain point, you figured out, you can make a career out of this. So since you've been in this industry since I would say like the early days, before people were doing this professionally, people were just tinkering and figuring it out.
Yeah.
How have you seen it change over time? Like, what are some of the big changes?
I think the biggest and probably the one that I think a lot of us were afraid of is it went, you think about the hacker mentality, the ability to tinker, the tinkering mentality, the hacker mentality, whatever you want to look at it. It was always to find out what it was. Why did it work? How did it work? What made it work? You look at the genesis of some of the first Trojan viruses that we used to write. I mean, they were just for shits and giggles. I remember writing that one of the spinning wheel ones where, your computer screen would all of a sudden go like this into a spinning machine. Your hard drive span up and then it gave everything back. It was like a washing machine. It was just for shits and giggles. And it went from having fun and exploring and ultimately protecting into how do we mint millionaires and billionaires. And I think that has been fundamentally the biggest shakeup, is there's so many of us have watched so many in the industry, make gazillions at the expense of actually protecting effectively.
Yeah, I know one of the things that stands out to me is you think about the early days and it was it was messing with communication systems. It was maybe doing stuff for fun, you said, spinning someone's game. And then all of a sudden, all these private companies, all the digitization everybody's aware of, everybody's data, everybody's every movement because of these phones here are somewhere. Yeah. So the stakes are so much higher. So is that, for someone who knows as much as you do, are you comforted by the fact that we're making good advances when it comes to security and technology, or are you concerned about how high the stakes are and our lack of security?
I think I'm concerned. The stakes are crazy high, exactly to your point. I mean, there is so much data out there now about everything. I mean, there always used to be, but it was written data. It was in a filing cabinet, it was stuck in somebody's drawer or somebody's back room, and that was, and only the people in the building, only the people who could get access to it. The problem is these days, all of your data is available anywhere almost all of the time. And so if I wanted to come after you, I had to go to the city hall or the city building to request a copy of the birth certificate. I had to go to where you work to get all your files and everything else. Now I can be sitting entirely across the other side of the planet. I don't even have to access those systems. I can pay a service to get all the geospatial, anything about you that I obviously possibly want. And I can compete for the service and spend $6 and just do the same damn thing. I mean, it's, in one way, it's wonderful because, I mean, it gives us the ability to find people who maybe don't want to be found. But on the other hand, it absolutely has stripped away any vestiges of what we would consider privacy.
Do you think you live your life differently? Like knowing what you know about security and privacy in terms of how you use technology or social media or anything like that?
Yeah, I think I do. I have no two ways about it. I mean, I always joke I have a lot of Facebook accounts, but none of them are in my name. You know, my Twitter account, I'm very well aware of what's on it. Same thing with, my LinkedIn. My LinkedIn account is probably the most infamous on that side of it. So I'm very careful. And I put stuff on there fully aware of what could be and couldn't be used against me. My home network is probably a perfect example. You know, we have defensive systems watching it. We have, gateways watching it. We have VLANs and separations and segmentations. I've got deception running in the house, for crying out loud. So, and I also have tech in the house. I mean, the alarm systems on a mesh network. I've got wireless and, a wireless and all sorts of other camera systems. I've got all sorts of other things. But I go into it with my eyes open. I go into it asking the questions and knowing what the worst case scenario could be. Whereas unfortunately, most people just go straight after the shiny new objects and don't think twice about it.
Do you think if the average person kind of knew what you knew, they would take the same kind of measures? Or do you think that you do extra because of the line of work you're in and you're just a bigger
Probably
target?
a little from column A and a little from column B.
Yeah.
Perfect example. I mean, let's face it, I'd be a fun target for a lot of people. Not just because of who I am and what I've done, but also because I sit on the .mil and the .gov side of the world as well. I've got one foot in both camps, one foot in each camp, I should say. And so to that point, I make it an interesting and fun target for a bunch of different reasons. But I think what I would hope, honestly, what I really want out of society is for them to walk into a big box store and go, hey, I like the camera, but do me a favor, tell me about it, please. Tell me, where was it made? Hey, just do me a favor, tell me, what are the basics? What is the simple stuff? Where does my data go? How is that looking after me more effectively?
Yeah, for sure. I think I have conversations, I have two kids, and I always think about their digital footprint even versus mine, because they already want a phone. My daughter's young, already wants a phone, wants a tablet, wants to play the little games and everything. Totally, she wants to post pictures on social media, and she doesn't even have social media yet. She just sees others doing it. But that kind of curated life, what kind of individual is that going to create versus someone, who wasn't born and bred in this digital world?
I think it's still, the same thing. I got Morgan turned 18 a couple of months ago, and I finally put a picture of her and I together on the internet. I haven't done it for a long time. We finally did, and I did it with her consent. But up to that point, there's been very few, if any, pictures of her around on the internet. She's appeared on a couple of podcasts and stuff, wandered into the background. But there's been very little info, and that's because she and I have talked. She's had a phone since she was 10, 11, maybe 12, something like that. But it's part of it is because, her parents live in two completely separate directions, let's face it. But part of it has been, I talk with her, I work with her. She knows what I do for a living, so she knows if I really want to find shit out, I'm going to find it out. But it was a conversation, because at some point in time, and you'll find the same thing with your kids, at some point in time, we can't be there to be the barrier. All we can do is help them understand the questions to ask before they post a picture on Snapchat of the half naked picture to send to the boyfriend at the moment. Explain the consequences of those actions 5 years from now. Explain what data, where, and all this stuff. And that's all you can ever really do is go, look, I'm gonna help you understand the logic, the reasons, the whys, and questions. I'm going to trust you until I can't. And at that point in time, I'll come down like a hammer, but I will give you the opportunity to fail first.
Yeah, that's great. I didn't expect to get great parenting advice in our hacker discussion today, but that's as good as advice as any. It's a great snippet. and we're talking about social media. I was talking to my wife over the weekend, actually, because she wasn't caught up on Meta and everything that Facebook's doing. Yeah. And we were talking about like how like our little addictions, I was like, yeah, I kind of feel addicted to this thing. Like, I check it. If it's in my pocket, I'll check it, every 5 minutes, and LinkedIn, check it every 5 minutes. But can you imagine if you like worked in Meta, if you had friends in Meta, plus you had COVID to it where people are kind of working remotely anyway, like how addicting that could be, but also like how insecure that could be, the amount of data gathering and all the unknowns that comes with living in a virtual space. That'll be pretty incredible.
It's going to be really, really interesting because, I mean, again, you look at the next generation. You go back to my daughter, the same thing. She wants, pick a retailer. She wants the retailer to make her aware of special offers, of maybe clothing, of new fashions coming out. She wants that. But she draws the line at the fact that, well, the clothing companies realize that she's no longer a size 6. Maybe she's a size 8. So the clothing company's selling the information to the healthcare company, who then circles back and goes, hey, we notice your clothing's increased in size. Do we need to have a conversation about your insurance coverage? Or, hey, here's a Weight Watchers advert. That's where she's like, oh, hell no.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see where we used to draw the line versus where they're drawing the line. They have no problem with certain things coming in, and to some degree, neither do I. I love the fact I can go to Amazon and go, hey, I ordered something last month and I need another. Great, let me just go back through my history. Let me go back through the tracking and the profiling they've done on me for my convenience. But the moment those assholes try selling me something that, is, hey, we notice you're buying this. Maybe you need old age meds. Phew.
Yeah.
That's you've crossed the line, So there's definitely that fine balance.
Yeah, that's one thing I'm kind of optimistic about is that I wonder if like the next generation, take your daughter and my daughter, the next couple generations, if they'll be like a new type of savvy. So maybe they'll just have like a better eye for digital risk. Because like if you ask someone right now, it's like they're not thinking about the third or fourth order effects of giving someone my clothing size, which could impact my insurance. Whereas I feel like if you talk to someone below 20 right now, they're very in tune often with those types of like consequences and negative risks. So maybe it'll fix itself or at least do a little correction just because of the education.
I hope so. And to your point, I think I hope so. And the challenge is, our generation came into it, so we kind of understood it. There's the next generation that's like, say, under us, that's come after us, that's in it but doesn't understand the consequences. And I think you're right. The teenagers growing up now are suddenly going, hey, I still want some control of my life and you've taken too much from me. Now, whether we can put that cat in the bag, I don't really think so. But I hope we can do something about it. And to your point, as we end up with the meta, some of the crazy stuff I'm working on with the cognitive stuff and basically digitizing myself, that takes an entirely different direction on it. Because now, I'm taking me, I'm putting it in a digital system. And so now I've just literally handed my life to a set of microchips.
Yeah. Is that something you're researching right now? Is that what I heard you say?
Yeah, doing some pretty cool stuff on that. There's doing it for some interesting folks that want to use it for some fun applications.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I've, I guess, in listening to podcasts you've done and stuff like that, is how much research you do. Seems like you're constantly doing different types of research, really cool research. How do you come up with ideas like to do research? Let me just even more broadly, how do you do research? because there's like so much to it. There's the picking an idea, doing good research, publishing research, letting people know, making it applicable and practical. So how do you approach that?
To me personally, it's somewhat guided by whatever I'm finding of interest. But I'm also looking where the future's going. So you look at the future of communication, you look at the future of technology, the future of medicine, the future of all these other things, and where are we going? Perfect example. Let's take space travel. Let's just go with the one. You've got people chasing after putting humans on the moon, humans on Jupiter. I'm not Jupiter, humans on Mars, and kicking us off out past what we consider our part of the universe. You're like, well, hang on, this human body is pretty freaking fragile. It doesn't matter what you do to it. It's a fragile thing. Well, how can we take the body out of the equation? Well, we can do that. It's going to take some work, but we're working on that one. Then you turn around and go, well, hang on. This whole idea of actually space travel is horrendously wasteful. For every 1 kilogram you want to shoot into space, you're using 0.9 of a kilogram of fuel. So it's ridiculously wasteful. And you're like, okay, well then what do we do? Well, how do we take something down to the atomic level? And when you get to the atomic level, you sort of go, oh, shit acts differently. Which is now you start getting to quantum, and you start looking at entanglement. And you start looking at separation of particles and spatial movements, all sorts of crazy shit. It's like, well, hang on. Can we take this, squash it down, kick it off there, and you all of a sudden you're like, wow, there's some cool stuff we can, and how do we build our tech into this? So now you've got like 10 different research projects and all sorts of weird shit, and you still have enough to see the chest, and now you start reading up on it. Now you start looking at it, you start going, well, hang on. Nanotechnology was a perfect example. I'm like, okay, I want to mess around with nanotechnology. Well, how do you buy, gold, carbon, molecular particles? Well, you can actually buy the damn things. I'm like, okay, well, how do I buy them? How do I get the microscope? How do I encode them? So you start looking like Cello and Vera code and all sorts of other like languages, and all of a sudden, like 6 months later, you're encoding particles that you can now basically inject into a human body to make them do certain things. And so it's literally as simple as going, where are we going? Where is technology going? Mm-hmm. Where is the humanity going? Another example, let's look at problems that we have in this world. The current stuff with ecological problems, let's look at the amount of plastics and shit we use. Let's look at energy and how much energy we're using. So chasing those rabbit holes down and going, how could I make a difference there? What could I do? That really, for me, is the research world. That to me is, I like that stuff. I still mess around with just breaking shit. We were taking light bulbs. So again, go back to the grey history. My history with the original, the good old standard incandescent light bulbs, is we used to be able to shine a laser at the damn things and listen in on whatever was being said in the room. Really cool stuff you could do. But you can't do this with these new stupid bloody, like the smart light bulbs. Yeah. You can't do that. So you're like, well, what can I do? And then you start buying light bulbs down to Best Buy, down to Lowe's, down to Home Depot, and buying light bulbs. You start taking the fucking things to pieces. And you've got these light bulbs in pieces all over the desk, and you suddenly realize there's commonalities. Then you're like, well, all right, let's look at the pin ins, let's look at the pin outs, let's look at the code, let's look at the stuff, and everything else that you've learned at, the DEF CON hardware hacking villages. And all of a sudden you're like, hang on, I can turn audio on if I just do this. And now you can listen in on, IoT light bulbs wherever you want to be. So it's just doing stupid shit like that.
Yeah, as I'm hearing you speak, like you were talking about earlier space travel, and then you talked about like the Schrodinger's cat phenomena. I heard some quantum computing stuff in there. So I find whenever I partake in any of these kind of thought exercises, you start to notice how apparently very separated topics are entangled in interesting ways, So yeah. As a researcher, which I am not, how do you start? Do you typically begin with a problem like, hey, this is something I want to solve? Or is it, do you think, because you've done like years and years of research that you're subconsciously picking up on all of these patterns and like good ideas come to you?
I think that probably the latter these days. And it's also, it's that tinkerer hacker mindset still. Thankfully, touch wood, it's still there. It's that thirst for knowledge. Mm-hmm. How does something work? Why does something work? What makes it work? Could I do it differently? Could I figure something out? It's that, I think, is a huge part of it. It's that thirst for understanding. Well, hang on, if it's doing that, what could I do differently? How could I do it differently? It's no different than makes a good defensive person. If you look at anybody on the on the blue team, mm-hmm. they're doing nothing more than looking at that haystack, going, how do I start subdividing that haystack to find the freaking needle that I need? Same with the red team. Here's my target. How do I most effectively utilize my time to get to those attack vectors that I want to find out? It's no different.
How many projects do you think you're working on at any given time? Are you kind of dedicated effort on one research topic, or are you working on like 24 and it kind of just comes together?
Quite a few. Quite a few. I actually have a list. Hang on. I have a list, and the list is extensive. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 15.
15 research projects. And are they... Yeah. Would you add new if something came in your head now, or are you kind of
Oh
dedicated to
yeah,
those 15?
no, totally. Yeah, I'm a complete freaking squirrel. I'll find time to do it. God knows when it will be. Because I mean, I break my day up mostly organized. When I'm not sick, I break my day up pretty effectively, and so my research time is typically when everybody's gone to bed and the world will settle down a little bit, from like 9, 10 o'clock at night until 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. And that's typically a fairly dedicated. Sometimes I've got calls with like Israel or Japan or various other places, but more often than not, that time of night is pretty dedicated research time.
So once you choose, or projects come to you. That's probably a better way to say it. And you have a number going
There's
on.
something that I'm asked to do. There's a few like some of the communication stuff I'm asked to do. There's some interesting stuff we're doing with biomechanics and touch sets. So the ability literally to lay hands on technology and take data off of it. So it's all to do with bioengineering and storage of data and all that kind of stupid shit. So
Yeah,
that's been inbound. They've been asked to do some of that. That's probably about half the project. Oh shit, we got asked on one today. And that's an inbound. So probably about 50% inbound, 50% squirrel moments, middle of the night stuff.
is this just because you've earned a reputation in the industry as a team or a person that can be creative when it comes to hard problems? Is that where these come up?
Yeah, that's probably a big part of it. It's exactly to that point. I also have, it's to your point, it's the reputation. For good or for bad, I'm the one that's, I am the one that stood up and said, "Hey, I couldn't buy a Patriot missile because you wouldn't let me use an Amex to do that. So I figured out how to take one over. Is that okay?"
Yep.
Shit like that. When you do stuff like that, they tend to like go, okay, one, you're a pain in the ass. Secondly, don't you dare tell everybody else how to do it. And thirdly, we know how to call when we need stupid shit done.
Yes. At what point in your career did you switch from being a nuisance to being a researcher? And I mean that in the most complimentary way. Because I imagine when you're researching hard shit, people are just, like you said, I can take over a Patriot missile. And they're like, well, instead of you being the guy that's causing us problems, maybe you should do some research. Did that just happen one day for you?
That's an interesting one. Yeah, that's tough because shit. You go back in my history. I was first officially a nuisance when my father had me arrested. I was, 14, 15 years old. And at that point, all they did was just take away all the computers because they didn't know what the hell to do with me. I got yelled at when I came out of active service. And then it went from being a nuisance to you got options. You either continue to be a nuisance, at which point we're going to shut you down, or you can come hang out with us. But even hanging out with us, even since I got over to this country, I've still managed to annoy the living snot out of the feds on a regular basis. But thankfully, I've got cover fire from some other folks. But I think I still try to tread. I still want to be a nuisance to some degree, because if you're a nice researcher, sometimes you either get shut down with NDAs, people don't necessarily want to listen, they think there's a cry wolf going on or whatever else. But if you stand up and go, all right, assholes, you're not listening to me, I'm just going to drop it right here, exactly what can be done with trains. Perfect example. Here's how to derail a train wherever you feel like doing it. Here's how to turn the ship over. At that point, they're like, oh, bastard, you're a pain in the ass, but we actually have to do something about it, which is all we really want. I don't want people dying because we just don't care to fix the problems.
There's something special about at Risk 360 we call it taking the message to Garcia, and there's like something special about the people who ask for forgiveness rather than permission, but once they get there, you just can't deny it. You're like, well, You did it. I probably would have put bureaucracy in place to prevent you from doing that, but now I have to take some action. So there's like a special place for that, I think. where do you think the line is? Like, one of the things I think about when I think about security research is like there's a special art when it comes to disclosure. And like when you're dealing with life and death, like it sounds like you are in some of those cases, like you have to responsibly disclose. But if people if they won't take action after you responsibly disclose, that's kind of, I could see the line of logic where maybe you have to escalate from there to get attention. But where do you come down when it comes to disclosure of like stuff that you find in research?
It's tough. It's stupid tough for a bunch of reasons. I mean, you hit a couple of them definitely. I will never sit down outside of a closed door inside of a skiff and explain exactly how to take a Patriot, a ship, a sub, or any of that kind of stuff out. I will not do that. I will insinuate and I will talk about how to do it, but behind closed doors is where the demo and the stuff happens. That's just how it is. And hopefully by talking to press and meeting other people, awareness comes out like, oh, this shit can happen. You go do your own research and figure out if you can do it. Good luck. I hope you can. And hopefully by the time you figure it out, we fix the stupid things. Now, the flip on that one is an interesting one when you start looking at exploits. Mm-hmm. So this is where it gets really, really, really tough because, perfect example, you take a look at these phones, iPhones. If I find an exploit on this iPhone, several things can happen. One, I can go to Apple and say, hey, I can do stupid shit on your iPhone. And they go, hopefully, more often than not, decent, responsible, but they go, thank you for telling us. Validate, trust, pay you money. Great, fix it. Or I can go on the dark side of the market and go, hey, I found an exploit and make 10x, 100x that amount of money. Or I can go to an agency and go, hey, you can now use this exploit to keep an eye on folks that want to do harm to others. You have to hope that that's what they're going to do with it and they aren't going to use it to spy on people they shouldn't be spying on. But you never know. I can't hand an exploit over and go, I'm sorry, you can only use it to go spy on the bad people because I'm not at liberty to know exactly who every single bad person is out there. And that's where it gets tough because do you hand it out to Apple and fix everybody? Do you hand it to an agency and hope that you are preventing certain people from dying? Or do you make bank and, in my case, pay off a fairly vindictive ex-significant other and then, carry on my merry way? It's that is a nasty dilemma, unfortunately. And ethics plays and morals plays.
Yeah, it's and it's hard. It's easy, I think, from where we're sitting in a fairly wealthy nation and a comfortable house to say that you should be ethical and report that. But if you're hungry and you're in India, Western Europe, or Eastern, a third world country, and you find this stuff, it's extremely attractive to go get $1 million payday instead of responsibly disclosing because you have a hungry family at home, maybe, or some dire situation.
You've got the village taken care of. You're the hero of the area. You've saved the economy of the village. And now you've potentially got decent resources to go find another half a dozen. I mean, that's business. Mm-hmm. At that point, and next there's a certain 3-letter company out of a certain country knocks on your door and goes, hey, can we put those tools into our program and we'll cut you in for 10%.
And you get immunity. Along the way.
Ish.
Yeah. Or you're they'll godfather you, I'll come to you for a favor.
Yeah. And I mean, so it's tough because you're right. I mean, we're sitting here and I'm like, okay, we've got contracts, we've got projects we're working on. And I'm like sitting there going, yeah, we're in pretty good shape for the next, 6 months that we know of, like runway or whatever.
Yep.
So no, it's a tough one. It's
an easy one. Another phenomena that I've realized is there's like an asymmetry between like what it takes to investigate these issues and protect yourself against them versus what it takes to exploit them. So it could be $1 million, it costs me nothing to exploit it, to run ransomware, like next to nothing. Right. And it could be $1 million payday, but it costs me $1 million for the what if. And to me, there's such a value asymmetry in what it costs to protect yourself versus what it costs to exploit. I don't know how economically this is going to work itself out.
I gave a talk up in Wisconsin at a federal event, and I was kind of blunt and I wasn't very nice about it because I turned and said we have built an entire industry on ticking a box. We literally have built an entire trifecta. We've built the mob. You might not like being called it. We've built the mob. We're a protection racketeering organization now because you need to put a tick in the box. Whether you like it or not to do business, you've got to put a tick in the box.
Yep.
That depends on what you need to do. You need to put lots of ticks in the box. And now we've got special people that will give you those ticks in the boxes, no need for you to use special software. And it just keeps on going. And when you look at it that way, you're like, this is not good. Unfortunately, we kind of got to tear the house down a fair amount. It should be, every man, woman, beast, child has come up with their own set of freaking frameworks. Everybody loves to come up with their own set of controls and standards. I'm like, no, quit that shit, consolidate the hell out of it, get one simple set of ticks in the boxes. And by the way, explain to the customer tick in box does not equal secure. Yeah, so got to do a lot more ass than that. So we, as an industry, have got a shit ton more to do. It is not pretty.
Do you think we have to take down the internet and rebuild it? And what I mean by that is I don't know, there's some new technology, zero trust, or maybe blockchain and decentralization. I have no clue what the technology is. But do you think that we can fix the ecosystem as it exists, or does it need to be just overhauled over time?
I think it's going to have to be overhauled. I think it's going to have to be piecemeal overhaul because so much. I mean, think about it now. You go back 20 years, 20, 25 years. If we had turned off the internet, it would have sucked, but we would have carried on going. I mean, you do something akin to that now. I mean, that's humanity's. It ain't going to be pretty. You think you had problems when you didn't have toilet paper. Imagine what happens if people can't go to Facebook for 72, 96 hours. Good grief alive.
Yeah, you're not buying anything anymore. You're not transacting. Barter's all gone.
I mean, how many people would instantly lose their jobs? So now you've got an economic issue. To your point, you have logistics issues because now I don't know where my stuff is. I have no clue what ship it's on. Where I don't even know how I'm going to get paid for it. So now, from an economic impact, from a company impact, from a human impact, from a healthcare impact, I mean, it's not pretty. I think honestly, what we have to do is say there and go, okay. We've talked about it, the critical infrastructure. What do we need to do to carry on from a societal standpoint? Now, when we figure that out, now let's take a step back and go, how do we make that to be more effective? How do we actually build it with a level of redundancy, with the controls in place? Now let's build on top of that. Look at the financial markets, look at the healthcare market, look at the retail markets, look at, all the other areas that are around it and actually take one model. Not your model and my model, because I don't want to do the same model you're doing because it's got your name on it. I want my model with my name on it. We need to get rid of that shit. The dick waving's got to go away. It needs to be one freaking model you and I agree on. Now let us together integrate it, implement it, cooperate, collaborate, and do it properly.
Last topic, Chris. We talked earlier and we always like to recommend books and resources to folks, especially thought leaders like yourself that's influenced you. And then you mentioned that you had a list of 29 books or something like that you recommend all the time to folks.
Yeah.
Can you talk about those? What are some books or resources that's really influenced the way that you think and you find a lot of value in?
I think so. For me, especially in this day and age, I have always been a little gruff and a little rough around the edges, shall we say. However, over the years, I've mellowed to some degree. I've also learned how to more effectively communicate. And some of that I will lay right at the feet of an amazing friend, Catherine Ellerman. She's up in Buffalo, at the university up in that neck of the woods. And she challenged me years ago. She was like, hey, you're better than this. I'm like, oh, I don't want to be better than this. But I knew I was. And she challenged me. I'm like, all right, I'll succeed and I'll be nicer. And so I sat down. I'm like, all right, need to be effective communication, collaboration. So a couple of the books in The Verbal Judo from Thompson is a perfect example of how to go into situations, especially with us. We're security people. We're typically going into adversarial situations. How do we de-escalate it? How do we get more cooperation and collaboration? So the Verbal Judo one is a perfect example of one. You start taking a look at even some of the simple stuff from White and Club, Blue Team Field Manual, Red Team Field Manual. There's even simple stuff like the Bash reference, Python reference. But The Book of Five Rings is another one of those books that you read to understand how humans work. Good to great, having built numerous businesses and worked in numerous businesses and dealt with humans. You walk into a managerial situation or anything along those lines, you need to understand that you need the right people in the right places, doing the right things happily. And then guess what? Shit actually works. And you got all these other ones. Same thing with to me, honestly, the other ones, and I think this goes into this tinkering thing and everything else, which is the late Sir Terry Pratchett. A lot of us grew up on Douglas Adams. A lot of us grew up on, the Terry Pratchett's, late Sir Terry Pratchett's books and stuff like that. Tom Holt, Rankin, all of those types of books that kind of take humanity and take life, put it through the ringer, put some humor with it, and then position it in a way that makes us think a little bit. And so anything along those lines, I think that makes you think are actually fantastic books.
How many books do you think you read a year on average?
Yeah. I've got half of 4 or 5 on the go at the moment. 100, 150, wow. Probably something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
At least and a lot of them are in electronic format. I used to be, and I still am to some degree. I have Pratchett being a perfect example, and actually Fenneman's lectures. So, I have those in English, I have those in American, I have them on digital format, I have some of them in audio form. Yeah, it's not good. I'm a packer out when it comes to that stuff.
That's
and
awesome.
I got signed versions of the bunch as well.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm like probably like a 50 to 75 book a year person, but I don't listen to books like on Audible or anything like that. Like I hear some people do. I'm going to start doing that because I hear a lot of people do that. I listen to podcasts and stuff instead, but that's incredible.
Yeah, I do the books. And actually what got me started was years and years ago. I lived in Ohio and I used to drive to Chicago for work.
Yeah. And
I started off, I got Lord of the Rings and the entire Tolkien series on CD at the time. And I would just put those in. And that, it's a 5, 6 hour drive, whatever the hell it was. That drive, you just ignored it. I still went for it. And I did it. I was driving down to Arizona the other week. Chucked a couple of books on that way, and just it's a 12, 13 hour drive or something like that. And it's just nice. Music sometimes, just a fun book. As long as it's narrated by somebody who's actually eloquent, it's a good thing.
Yeah, and it's amazing when you start. I went through a series a while back where I was reading a series on the American founding fathers. For some reason, I just thought like Franklin and some of those guys were just interesting, and but I was starting the business Risk 360 around that same time. And it's just interesting how like these historical books and a couple tech books I was reading, and you were mentioning how like all this stuff comes together in a confluence randomly, and like all these little tidbits were coming together as I was building the business. And I was like, they're all saying the same thing, but they're wildly different topics. So like you just never know where those insights will come from. So you just kind of constantly be consuming. But awesome, Chris. Thank you so much. This has been an excellent conversation. Thanks for all the research you do and sharing the good word around the internet. So thanks so much, Chris, and thanks for being here.
Appreciate it. Yep, thanks for having me. Much, much, much appreciated.